On the fire-scorched mountainside, SEAL Team Bravo found themselves compressed into a narrow canyon, casualties mounting by the minute. "We won't make it," Commander Hawkins whispered as 120 enemy fighters tightened their noose. They were out of options. But 3 kilometers away on an elevated ridge, legendary sniper Lance Barrett lay buried in mud, his eye never leaving the scope. Wind patterns shifted constantly, the range exceeded all operational standards, but he muttered through clenched teeth, "Long as I'm breathing, they're living." The first shot cut through the wind, and then 38 more changed everything. The ambush came without warning. SEAL Team Bravo had been conducting a reconnaissance sweep through the Kandahar Valley when the first RPG screamed overhead, detonating against the cliff face behind them. Commander Ethan Hawkins hit the ground, rolled left, and came up with his rifle already searching for targets. Contact rear. Multiple hostiles. Petty Officer Derek Jensen's voice cracked through the radio static. Bullets chewed into the rocky ground around them. The canyon walls amplified every sound, the sharp crack of a K-47 seconds, the deeper thump of PKM machine guns, the desperate shouts of men fighting for their lives. Hawkins did a rapid head count. 21 men, his entire team. They'd walked straight into a kill zone. "Fall back to position, Charlie," he commanded, but even as the words left his mouth, he knew they were in trouble. The terrain offered no real cover, just scattered boulders and shallow depressions that wouldn't stop determined fire. Corpsman Tyler Grant was already working on Petty Officer Marcus Webb, who'd taken shrapnel to the leg from that first RPG. Blood darkened the sand beneath them. "How bad?" Hawkins asked, sliding into position beside them. "Bad enough. He needs evac within the hour." Grant's hands moved with practiced efficiency, applying pressure, reaching for his medical kit. An hour. Hawkins almost laughed. They'd be lucky to survive the next 10 minutes. The enemy had positioned themselves perfectly. 2 machine gun nests on the high ground, approximately 120 fighters spread in a semicircle, and at least 1 sniper. Hawkins could tell from the precision shots that kept them pinned. "Sir, we've got movement on the left flank," Lieutenant Aaron Mitchell reported, his voice tight. "They're trying to cut off our retreat." Hawkins grabbed his radio. "Bravo 6 to command, we need immediate air support, grid coordinates." The radio screeched with interference. Someone was jamming their communications. "Again," Hawkins barked into the handset. "Bravo 6 requesting emergency extraction." Nothing but static. Sergeant First Class Connor Riley crawled up beside him, dirt streaking his face. "Commander, we're down to maybe 30% ammunition. If they push hard, we won't be able to hold." Hawkins looked at his team. Young faces, some barely out of their 20s. Men who'd trusted him to bring them home. Men who had families waiting, futures ahead of them. The enemy fire intensified. A PKM machine gun opened up from the eastern ridge, rounds kicking up geysers of rock and sand. One of his men screamed, hit in the shoulder. "Medic." Grant was already moving, low crawling toward the wounded SEAL. Hawkins pressed himself against a boulder, feeling the impacts vibrate through the stone. He'd been in tight situations before: Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, but this felt different. This felt final. The sun blazed overhead, temperature pushing past 110 degrees. Sweat stung his eyes. His mouth tasted like copper and dust. "Sir!" Jensen shouted. "They're massing for an assault!" Hawkins risked a glance around the boulder. His stomach dropped. The enemy was reorganizing, forming up in groups of 10 to 15. Discipline, training. This wasn't some ragtag militia. These fighters knew what they were doing. He caught Mitchell's eye across the killing ground. The lieutenant's expression said it all. They both knew the math. 21 SEALs, low on ammunition, no air support, no reinforcements, against a numerically superior force with the high ground. Another explosion closer this time. Someone's grenade. The concussion wave slammed into Hawkins, stealing his breath. When his vision cleared, he saw Riley staring at him, waiting for orders. Orders that would save them. Orders that didn't exist. Hawkins keyed his radio one more time, knowing it was probably useless. "Any station this net, this is Bravo 6. We are danger close, taking effective fire from superior force. Request immediate support." Static answered him. Riley leaned close, voice barely audible over the gunfire. "Sir, realistically, what are our chances?" Hawkins met his gaze. "Thought about lying, decided these men deserved better. "We won't make it," he said quietly. "Not unless something changes fast." The words hung in the air between them, heavy as stone. Then the enemy sniper fired again, and Petty Officer James Hartford fell backward, dead before he hit the ground. 3 kilometers to the northeast, Marine Scout sniper Lance Barrett lay motionless on Eagle's Spine Ridge. Most people couldn't stay perfectly still for 6 hours. Lance had once remained in position for 32, watching a compound until the target emerged. Patience wasn't just a skill, it was survival. He'd set up his hide site before dawn, digging into the rocky soil, covering himself with a ghillie net that broke up his outline. The Macmillan TAC 338 rested on its bipod, the barrel cold, waiting. This was supposed to be overwatch for a supply convoy. Simple job, boring even. Then the radio crackled. "Bravo, 6 immediate support." Lance's hand moved to his radio dial, fine-tuning the frequency. The transmission was weak, breaking up, but he caught enough. "SEAL team. Heavy contact." Grid coordinates that put them 3 clicks southwest. He pulled out his rangefinder, did the calculations. 3 kilometers, 200 meters. Wind currently at 15 knots from the northwest, but these mountain valleys created unpredictable currents. Through his scope, he could barely make out the firefight. Distance reduced it to tiny figures, muzzle flashes like distant lightning. Lance had been called Ghost Line for 7 years. The name came from his first deployment, 12 confirmed kills, all at ranges exceeding 1,500 meters, all in 1 week. Command said he could thread bullets through ghosts. But this was different. Standard operating procedure maxed out at 2,000 meters for a reason. Beyond that, too many variables. Wind shear between elevations, temperature gradients. The Coriolis effect became significant. Bullet drop exponential. At 3,200 meters, he'd be attempting something that belonged in theory, not practice. His spotter, Corporal Nathan Brooks, had gone down the ridge to coordinate with the convoy. Lance was alone. He adjusted his scope, zoomed in, maximum magnification. The SEAL position came into focus, men pressed into cover, surrounded. He could see the enemy positions, the machine gun nests. The radio crackled again. Weaker now. "Anyone Bravo 6 we are." Then nothing. Lance knew what that meant. Comms jammed. No air support could find them. No artillery could target effectively. The SEALs were on their own. He studied the tactical picture. The enemy had them in a classic kill zone. High ground, superior numbers, coordinated fire, professional work. Lance's mind calculated automatically. If those SEALs died, the Western defensive line collapsed. The convoy he was supposed to protect would drive straight into an ambush, dozens more casualties. He could call command, request permission to engage. But by the time they argued about protocols and ranges and acceptable risk, those men would be dead. His finger rested on the cold trigger guard. Lance thought of his brother, David. Staff Sergeant David Barrett, killed 4 years ago in Helmand Province. David had been pinned down, wounded, calling for help. By the time air support arrived, he'd bled out. Lance had made a promise at that funeral. Never again. If he could make the shot, he'd take it. He checked his data book wind speed at different elevations, temperature at 104 degrees, barometric pressure, his custom loads, 300 grain Sierra Match King hollow points, muzzle velocity 2,750 feet per second. At this range, flight time would be roughly 4.2 seconds. The bullet would drop approximately 38 feet. Wind would push it laterally, maybe 15 inches, but that was theoretical. Mountain winds did unpredictable things. Lance closed his eyes, visualized the shot, felt the wind on his face, listened to its rhythm. When he opened them again, his breathing had slowed, 70 beats per minute, steady. He made adjustments to his scope, 36 minutes of angle elevation, 2 minutes right for wind. Through the glass, he watched an enemy sniper on the ridgeline. The man was good, Lance could tell from his positioning. That sniper was about to kill the SEAL commander. Lance could see it in the geometry of the angles. If nobody else can do it, Lance whispered to himself, I will. He settled into position, body perfectly aligned, cheek weld consistent. His finger found the trigger, applying exactly 3.2 pounds of pressure. The world narrowed to the space between heartbeats. Lance's radio suddenly squawked to life. Ghostline, This is Overwatch Command. What's your status? Captain Wesley Stone, Operations Officer. By the book type, who'd never fired a shot in anger. Lance keyed the mic. Command, I have visual on engaged friendly forces. SEAL element under effective fire. Grid. Negative. Ghost line. That's outside your operational area. Maintain overwatch on primary objective. Lance kept his eye in the scope. The enemy sniper was adjusting position, settling into a new firing point. Sir, those SEALs are about to be overrun. I can provide suppressive fire. A pause. Then Stone's voice came back, tight with bureaucratic concern. What's your range to target? 3,200 meters, sir. The pause was longer this time. That's beyond standard operating procedure, Barrett. Maximum effective range for the TAC 338 is listed at 2,000 meters in optimal conditions. Sir, with respect, I've made shots at 2,400. I can. The answer is negative. Those aren't optimal conditions. Mountain winds, heat shimmer, extreme range, the risk of fratricide is unacceptable. Through the scope, Lance watched the enemy sniper acquire his target. The SEAL commander, taking cover behind a boulder. Captain, if I don't engage, those men will die. That's not your call, Sergeant. Air support is being vectored. ETA, 15 minutes. 15 minutes. Lance had seen enough combat to know what could happen in 15 minutes. Hell, in 15 seconds. Sir, their comms are jammed. They can't mark targets for air. By the time support arrives, your orders are to maintain overwatch on the convoy. Is that understood? Lance's jaw clenched. The enemy sniper was now completely still, aiming. Understood, sir. He released the radio key. For about 5 seconds, Lance considered following orders. He'd never disobeyed a direct command. 14 years in the Marines, impeccable service record. Then he thought about David. About that funeral. About the chaplain's empty words about sacrifice and duty. About 21 men who'd done nothing wrong except trust that someone would help when they needed it most. Lance's hand moved across his scope, making micro-adjustments. He'd been calculating wind all through the conversation with Stone. Current conditions. Wind gusting between 12 and 17 knots, swirling through the valley. Temperature differential between his position and the target zone, approximately 8 degrees. Humidity low. Air density factors. He pulled out his Kestrel weather meter, took another reading, adjusted his calculations. The shot required him to aim at a point in empty space, roughly 40 feet above and 2 feet right of his actual target, trusting mathematics and experience to bend the bullet's path across more than 2 miles of air. Lance had done the impossible before, but never this impossible. His breathing slowed further, 58 beats per minute now. He trained himself to lower his heart rate through controlled breathing, less body movement, steadier aim. The enemy sniper's position filled his scope. Center mass would be easier, but at this range, even with a perfect shot, the man might survive long enough to fire. No, had to be a headshot. Lance calculated the movement of the Earth's rotation at this latitude, approximately 3 inches of deflection. Adjusted. His custom ammunition was hand-loaded to exacting specifications. Each bullet identical within 1 grain of powder. But at this distance, even a 1% variance could mean missing by feet. He had to trust his preparation. Lance thought about the consequences. If he missed, command would know he'd disobeyed orders. Court-martial, probably. Discharge at minimum. If he missed and hit a friendly, he didn't let that thought complete itself. But if he didn't try, 21 men died. And Lance knew he'd see their faces every time he closed his eyes for the rest of his life. Sorry, Captain, he murmured, though Stone couldn't hear him. Some things are worth the paperwork. He settled into final position. Perfect bone support, muscles relaxed. The rifle became an extension of his body. Through the scope, he watched the enemy sniper's finger tighten on his trigger. Lance exhaled slowly, naturally, letting half his air out. Found that perfect pause between breaths where the body goes completely still. His finger increased pressure on the trigger. 3 pounds, 3.1, 3.2. The rifle roared. The recoil slammed into Lance's shoulder, a familiar punch, absorbed through proper technique, but his eye never left the scope. 4.2 seconds. That's how long the bullet would take to travel 3,200 meters. 4.2 seconds, while physics and luck and skill fought for control of a tiny piece of copper-jacketed lead. In that time, Lance didn't breathe, didn't blink, just watched. The 300-grain bullet left the muzzle at 2,750 feet per second, spiraling from the rifling at 150,000 revolutions per minute. It climbed initially, following the barrel's upward cant, reaching its apex 50 meters out. Then gravity took over. The bullet began its long, arcing fall. Air resistance bled away velocity. Crosswinds buffeted it first one direction, then another as it passed through different atmospheric layers. Temperature gradients bent its path slightly. At the 2-kilometer mark, the bullet was traveling around 1,400 feet per second, tumbling slightly but holding true. 3 kilometers. Now at 900 feet per second, dropping fast. But Lance's calculations had accounted for the trajectory. 4 seconds. Through his scope, Lance watched the enemy sniper squeeze his trigger. 4.1 seconds. The enemy rifle bucked. 4.2 seconds. Lance's bullet arrived. The enemy sniper's head snapped sideways, his body crumpling. His rifle's shot went wild, the bullet burying itself harmlessly in stone 3 feet from Commander Hawkins. For a moment, everything on the battlefield seemed to freeze. The SEALs had heard the shot different sound signature than the enemy weapons. They'd seen their would-be killer drop. But from their position, the math didn't make sense. No one was close enough for that angle. Hawkins stared at the fallen enemy sniper, then scanned the ridgelines, trying to understand. "Where the hell did that come from?" Riley shouted. Nobody had an answer. The enemy fighters were equally confused. Their sniper had just died from no visible source. Some looked around wildly. Others assumed it was a lucky shot from the SEALs. Lance was already adjusting for his next target, the Western machine gun nest. "One," he whispered. His hands moved with practiced efficiency. Bolt back, spent casing ejected, new round chambered. Bolt forward, eye back to scope. The machine gunner was firing in sustained bursts, chewing up the SEAL position. Lance could see the weapon clearly, a PKM, Russian-made, belt-fed. Different target, different angle. Wind had shifted slightly, now gusting to 19 knots. Lance made adjustments. This was going to be harder. The machine gunner was partially behind a rock wall, only his upper torso exposed when he leaned into the weapon. Moving target. Not fast, but motion complicated things. Lance watched for 3 seconds, timing the pattern. The gunner would fire a burst, duck, shift position, fire again. 5-second cycle. Lance waited for the next cycle to begin. The gunner rose up, hands on the weapon's grips. Exhale. Pause. Squeeze. The rifle roared again. 4.2 seconds of flight. The bullet struck the machine gunner in the upper chest, punching through body armor, shredding vital organs. The man dropped, his death grip triggering one final burst into the sky. The machine gun went silent. "2," Lance said. On the battlefield, Hawkins grabbed Riley's shoulder. "That's not us. Someone's giving us support fire." "From where?" Riley scanned the ridgelines. "I don't see anyone. I don't know. But tell everyone to be ready to move when I give the word. This might be our only chance." Lance was already selecting Target 3, the eastern machine gun nest, but this one had spotted the threat. The crew was pulling their weapon back, trying to get behind better cover. Lance had maybe 10 seconds before they'd be protected. He didn't overthink it, trusted his setup, his previous adjustments, his experience. The shot felt right the moment he squeezed the trigger. The second machine gunner's head exploded in a pink mist. The assistant gunner froze in shock for half a second before diving for cover, but Lance's follow-up shot caught him mid-dive, spinning him sideways into the dirt. 3, 4. The enemy formation was beginning to crack. 2 machine guns silent, their sniper dead. Someone was killing them from impossible distance, and they couldn't see the threat. Panic spread like disease through unprepared units. But these fighters weren't unprepared. After the initial shock, their commander started barking orders. Fighters scattered, found better cover. They couldn't see Lance, but they knew the general direction from wound ballistics. And they knew one shooter couldn't cover every angle. 20 fighters broke left, trying to flank the SEAL position while keeping terrain between themselves and the mysterious sniper. Lance saw the movement, swung his rifle, found the lead fighter, squeezed, miss. The bullet kicked up dirt 2 feet behind the target. The wind had shifted again. Lance cursed silently, made corrections. Second shot. The lead fighter dropped, clutching his leg, not fatal, but out of the fight. 5. The rest of the flanking team scattered. Lance tracked one, fired. Direct hit. 6. But while he engaged the left flank, the right flank was moving. He couldn't be everywhere. Hawkins saw the tactical situation developing. Mitchell, Riley, get the wounded ready to move. When this sniper creates an opening, we're pushing hard for that dried riverbed. It's our only chance. Grant had 3 men stabilized but still in bad shape. Sir, moving them is going to hurt. Dying hurts worse. Make it work. Lance shifted targets again. Found an enemy squad leader trying to coordinate the assault. The man was gesturing, pointing, organizing his fighters into disciplined fire teams. Leaders first. Always. Lance's bullet covered the distance in 4.3 seconds, slightly different due to changed wind conditions, and entered the squad leader's chest cavity at an angle, tumbling through lung and heart. 7. But even as that man fell, Lance realized the truth. He was one man with one rifle. The enemy had over 100 fighters. He could slow them, hurt them, make them cautious. He couldn't stop them all. The SEALs needed to move. Now. As if reading his mind, Hawkins gave the order. Bravo! We're moving! Cover and move! Standard leapfrog! Go! 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 Lance shifted his focus, laying down covering fire. Not aimed shots now, just keeping enemy heads down, while the SEALs displaced. He fired 8 rounds in rapid succession, working the bolt like a machine, placing bullets near enemy positions. Most missed their targets, but that wasn't the point. The point was making the enemy think twice about looking up. 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. His shoulder ached from recoil. The rifle barrel was getting hot. But the SEALs were moving. Lance had done the math before the engagement started. 60 rounds in his pack. At this rate of fire, his barrel would overheat before he emptied half of them. Through his scope, he watched the SEALs bounding toward the dried riverbed. Good tactical movement teams covering each other, wounded supported between stronger men. These were professionals working at the edge of capability. But the enemy wasn't giving up. A new group of fighters appeared from the northern ridge reinforcements, maybe 20 strong. They moved with military precision, using cover effectively, communicating with hand signals. Lance identified their leader, an older man with a graying beard, shouting orders. He wore no special insignia, but everyone deferred to him. High-value target. Lance centered the crosshairs, exhaled, squeezed. The bullet flew true. 16. The leader staggered, clutched his throat, collapsed. His men scattered, leaderless now, and their coordinated assault dissolved into confused fire. But while Lance focused north, the eastern group was flanking. They'd learned to move during his reload cycles, those 2-second windows, when his scope lifted from their position. One fighter made it within 30 meters of the SEALs before Petty Officer Jensen spotted him and opened fire with his M4. The range was close enough that Jensen's rounds found their mark, but the position was compromised. Lance swung back east, found 3 fighters advancing in a wedge formation. Lead man, squeeze, fire. 17. Left man, adjust 0.2 degrees for wind, fire. 18. Right man was diving for cover. Lance led him by 3 feet, squeezed. Miss. The bullet sparked off stone. Correction, fire again. 19. Down. But his 19th shot revealed a problem. The bullet's impact was 6 inches left of where he'd aimed. His barrel was heating unevenly, warping slightly. At these ranges, even microscopic changes in the barrel altered trajectory. Lance pulled a wet cloth from his pack, wrapped it around the barrel to cool it, waited 10 precious seconds. The cloth steamed. On the battlefield, Hawkins and his men were pinned again. They'd made it 50 meters, good progress, but not enough. The dried riverbed was still 80 meters away, and now they were taking fire from 3 directions. "We need that sniper," Riley shouted, firing his rifle at an enemy position. "Whoever he is, we need him now." Lance unwrapped the cloth. His barrel temperature had dropped enough. He settled back into position. A bullet cracked past his own head close enough to hear the sonic snap. Someone had triangulated his position. He had maybe minutes before they adjusted their fire accurately. Didn't matter. He'd stayed in hotter positions. Through the scope, Lance saw an enemy fighter preparing an RPG. The rocket launcher was pointed directly at the cluster of wounded SEALs. No time for perfect wind calculations. Lance estimated, adjusted, fired. The bullet struck the RPG warhead just as the fighter pulled the trigger. The shaped charge detonated in the man's hands, killing him and 3 fighters nearby instantly. 20. The shockwave knocked over 2 more enemy fighters. Lance serviced both targets with rapid shots. 21. 22. But the RPG explosion had another effect. It created smoke and dust that drifted across the battlefield. Lance's visibility decreased dramatically. He could still see shapes, movement, but precise targeting became nearly impossible. At 3,200 meters, even small atmospheric interference mattered. Lance switched to a different strategy. Instead of headshots, he aimed for center mass. Larger target, higher probability of hits. He found an enemy fighter silhouetted against the dust cloud. Fired. 23. The shape dropped. Another fighter. Fire. 24. Movement to the left. Fire. 25. He was shooting faster now, accepting lower accuracy in exchange for volume of fire. The psychological effect mattered. The enemy needed to believe that anywhere they showed themselves, death followed. A gust of wind cleared the dust momentarily. Lance saw the SEAL element, now just 40 meters from the riverbed. Hawkins was carrying one of the wounded men, rifle slung, completely exposed. 3 enemy fighters had flanked wide and were drawing beads on the commander. Lance's next 3 shots were pure instinct, no time for mathematics, just feel, experience, and luck. First fighter. Fire. Hit in the shoulder, spinning him. 26. Second fighter. Fire. Miss by inches. Correct and fire again. Hit. 27. Third fighter got his shot off. Lance saw Hawkins stagger but keep moving. Couldn't tell if he was hit or just reacting. Lance's shot took the third fighter in the chest. 28. The SEALs reached the riverbed and tumbled into it. The depression was only 4 feet deep, but after being completely exposed, it felt like a fortress. They'd bought themselves minutes, maybe. Lance allowed himself one breath of relief. Then his radio crackled. Ghost line. This is Overwatch Command. We have reports of unauthorized fire from your position. Explain immediately. Captain Stone. Lance ignored him, kept shooting. An enemy squad was trying to work around the southern flank, stay out of his line of sight. But they had to cross an open stretch just 15 meters, but enough. Lance waited until they committed to the movement. All 6 fighters in the open simultaneously. He worked the bolt like a machine, muscle memory from 10,000 repetitions on the range. 6 shots. 7 seconds. 29. 30. 31. 32. 33. 34. 4 hits. 2 grazes. The squad scattered back to cover. Assault broken. Ghost line. Respond immediately, or I will have MPs at your location within the hour. Lance finally keyed the mic. Command, I'm a little busy. Will file a full report when I'm done not letting 21 SEALs die. Ghost line out. He released the key before Stone could respond, then switched off the radio entirely. Some battles you won, some you lost, and some you fought anyway because it was the right thing to do. Through his scope, Lance assessed the situation. The SEALs were in better position now, but still surrounded. The enemy had pulled back slightly, respecting the invisible sniper, but they weren't retreating. They were regrouping. And Lance had just seen something that made his blood cold. More vehicles approaching from the east. Technicals, pickup trucks with heavy weapons mounted in the beds. He counted 3, maybe 4. If those guns opened up on the riverbed, the SEALs would be shredded. Lance centered his scope on the lead vehicle, still 400 meters from the battlefield. The gunner was manning a D-K heavy machine gun 12.7mm rounds that would punch through body armor like paper. Extreme deflection shot. Target moving at approximately 30 kilometers per hour. Wind at 22 knots and rising. Lance had to lead the target by nearly 12 feet, accounting for vehicle movement and bullet flight time. He took the shot. The gunner jerked backward, dead instantly. The technical swerved as the driver panicked, nearly rolling. 35. Second vehicle. Different angle. Wind slightly altered. Lance adjusted, fired. Miss. The bullet sparked off the truck's hood. Reload. Correct. Fire again. The second gunner dropped. 36. But the third and fourth vehicles had stopped, their crews realizing they were under fire from long range. The gunners dismounted, scattered. Smart, made them harder targets, but also less effective. Lance would take that trade. He was down to his last 24 rounds. Had to make them count. The enemy commander, whoever he was, knew his business. Lance watched through his scope as the tactical situation evolved. The fighters weren't panicking anymore. They'd absorbed their casualties, reorganized, and were now executing a coordinated assault plan. 60 additional fighters emerged from positions Lance hadn't even identified. They'd been waiting, hidden, letting the first wave absorb his attention and ammunition. Ambush within an ambush. Professional work. The new fighters moved in teams of 4, using suppressing fire and movement techniques that Lance recognized from his own training. Someone had taught them well. His rifle's barrel was overheating again. The cloth wrap had helped, but sustained fire at this rate generated tremendous heat. The barrel was discolored now, the bluing burned away in patches. Worse, his right shoulder ached from recoil. 14 years of shooting, thousands of rounds fired in training and combat, had taken their toll. The joint wasn't what it used to be. Each shot now came with a spike of pain. Lance ignored it. Pain was just information. Through his scope, he watched the new assault develop. The enemy was focusing their attack on the northern edge of the riverbed, the weakest point in the SEAL defensive position. Lance engaged the lead element. His shot went wide by 8 inches, the warped barrel affecting his precision. He adjusted, fired again. Direct hit. 37. But while he shot north, the eastern group advanced, and the southern group, and the western group. The enemy had him mapped now, understood they needed to attack from multiple directions simultaneously to divide his attention. One sniper couldn't cover 4 directions at once. Lance worked the bolt, swung to the eastern threat, fired. Miss. Correction. Fire again. Hit. 38. Swing south. Find target. Fire. Down. 39. Swing west. Fire. Miss. His timing was off now. Fatigue setting in. The micro-movements required for extreme range precision demanded absolute muscular control, and his muscles were tired. Lance squeezed his eyes shut for 2 seconds, reset his focus. When he opened them, the battlefield seemed clearer. Eastern threat rising. Fire. Hit. 40. Southern target. Fire. Hit. 41. Northern cluster. Fire. Graze. But the fighter went down, clutching his arm. 42. But for every fighter he dropped, 2 more advanced. The mathematics were brutal. He'd killed or wounded 42 enemy combatants, an impossible feat of marksmanship, and it wasn't enough. The SEALs were firing everything they had, but their ammunition was nearly exhausted. Lance could see it in their shooting patterns, short, controlled bursts now instead of sustained fire. They were rationing, making every round count. Commander Hawkins was wounded. Lance could see blood on the man's left arm, though he was still fighting, still directing his team. 3 more SEALs were down. 2 weren't moving at all. Lance's radio suddenly crackled to life, even though he'd switched it off. Emergency override frequency. Unknown sniper element. This is SEAL Bravo 6. Hawkins' voice, strained but controlled. I don't know who you are or where you are, but you've kept us alive this long. We're down to maybe 5 minutes of ammunition. If you've got anything left, now would be the time. Lance keyed his mic. Bravo 6, this is Ghostline. I read you. I'm not going anywhere. A pause. Then, Ghostline. That's Barrett? Lance Barrett? Affirmative. Christ, man, you're 3 clicks away. How? Doesn't matter. Stay low. Help is coming. Lance hoped that was true. Air support had to be close now. Ghostline, you should know they're prepping for a final assault. Everything they've got, all at once. I'm seeing at least 80 effectives organizing. 80. Against 1 sniper whose barrel was warped, whose shoulder screamed with each shot, whose ammunition was running low. Copy that. I see them. Lance did see them. The enemy was massing in dead ground, outside his direct line of fire. They'd learned his coverage zones, identified his blind spots. When they came, they'd come fast, and from angles he couldn't adequately cover. He had maybe 15 rounds remaining. The enemy had 80 fighters. For the first time since the engagement began, Lance felt genuine doubt. Not fear, he'd left fear behind years ago in a firefight outside Fallujah, but doubt. Mathematical, tactical doubt that questioned whether skill alone could overcome these odds. His hand trembled slightly as he loaded a fresh magazine. 5 rounds. He had 3 magazines left. 15 rounds to stop 80 fighters. Lance thought about David again. Remembered the last conversation they'd had, 2 days before David deployed on his final mission. "You ever feel like maybe we're fighting battles we can't win?" David had asked over beer. "Every battle starts impossible," Lance had replied. "But someone's got to fight them anyway." David had smiled. "You always were the stubborn one." Now, lying in mud 3,200 meters from dying men, Lance understood what David had meant. Some battles you fought not because you'd win, but because losing without fighting wasn't an option. He settled back into position, eye to scope, finger on trigger. The enemy began their assault. The assault came like a wave. 80 fighters, moving in coordinated teams, covering each other's advancement. Disciplined, professional, terrifying. Lance fired into the mass. Each shot took down one fighter, but there were so many. 43, 44, 45. His bolt worked like a machine, but he couldn't reload fast enough. 3 targets for every second, and he needed 4 seconds between shots at this range. The enemy closed the distance to the riverbed. 70 meters, 60, 50. The SEALs were firing on full automatic now, desperation overriding ammunition discipline. The sound of their rifles was constant, deafening even at Lance's distance. But they were being overwhelmed. Lance saw Hawkins rise up to throw a grenade. 3 enemy rounds hit him, chest, shoulder, leg. The commander went down hard. "No," Lance whispered. He swung his rifle, found one of the shooters, fired, hit. 46. Found the second shooter, fired. The bullet went low, struck the man's hip, spinning him. 47. The third shooter had taken cover. On the battlefield, Riley was dragging Hawkins back into the depression. Grant was already moving toward them, medical kit bouncing against his side. The enemy was 30 meters from the riverbed now. At that range, they could throw grenades into the SEAL position. It would be a slaughter. Lance's hands moved automatically, loading his last magazine. 5 rounds. 5 shots to change everything. He couldn't do it. The math didn't work. 5 rounds against 50 remaining fighters. For the first time, Lance Barrett, Ghostline, the sniper who'd never missed when it counted, felt the weight of impossible odds crushing down. His finger rested on the trigger, but he couldn't make himself squeeze. What was the point? 5 more dead enemies wouldn't change the outcome. Those SEALs were going to die. And it would be his fault for not being good enough, fast enough, accurate enough. Lance's vision blurred. Sweat? Tears? He didn't know. Then his radio crackled one more time. Ghostline. Hawkins' voice, weak but clear. "Don't stop, please, my men. Don't let them die for nothing." Something in that plea cut through Lance's despair. He thought about David's last words, written in a letter that arrived 3 days after the funeral. "Little brother, if you're reading this, I'm gone. But that's okay. I did what I signed up for. I protected the men beside me. There's no higher honor than that. Remember, it's not about being perfect. It's about being present. Show up. Fight. That's all any of us can do." Lance's hands steadied. He couldn't save all of them. Maybe he couldn't save any of them. But he could fight until his last round was gone, until his barrel melted, until enemy bullets found him. He could be present. Lance inhaled deeply, exhaled slowly. His heart rate dropped back to 60. The tremor in his hands disappeared. Through his scope, he found his next target, an enemy fighter carrying an RPG, preparing to fire directly into the riverbed. 48. The fighter dropped, and the RPG fell, unfired. New target. An enemy leader, identified by the way others clustered near him for orders. 49. Down. Third target. A machine gunner trying to set up his weapon on the riverbed's edge. 50. The gunner collapsed across his weapon. 2 rounds left. The enemy was 10 meters from the riverbed now. Hand-to-hand range in seconds. Lance made a decision. Instead of killing 2 more fighters, he aimed at the ground between the assault line and the SEALs. Fired both rounds rapidly, kicking up dirt and rock fragments. The enemy line hesitated just for a second, assuming they were still under accurate fire. 1 second was enough. The air filled with a sound Lance knew from 100 missions. The deep whoop 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 of helicopter rotors. 2 Apache gunships crested the southern ridge, rockets already streaking toward the enemy positions. The explosions were apocalyptic. Lance dropped his rifle, pressed his face into the mud, and let out a shuddering breath. The Apaches transformed the battlefield in 30 seconds. Hellfire missiles struck the enemy vehicles, turning them into blooming fireballs. The 30mm chain gun under the lead helicopter's nose rotated, finding targets with mechanical precision. Each burst of fire turned 3 or 4 enemy fighters into pink mist. The enemy assault broke. Fighters scattered, abandoned their wounded, fled toward any cover they could find. It didn't matter. The helicopters hunted them with thermal imaging, rockets, and sustained chain gun fire. A few enemy fighters made it to cover, but the survivors numbered in single digits. Lance watched it all through his scope, detached, numb. The SEALs were safe now. Medical evacuation choppers would arrive within minutes. The battle was over. He'd done it. Kept them alive long enough. Lance rolled onto his back, stared at the Afghan sky. His body ached everywhere. His shoulder felt like someone had driven nails through the joint. His right eye throbbed from hours pressed against the scope. His rifle lay beside him, barrel still hot enough to shimmer the air. The weapon had performed flawlessly despite the abuse. Lance made a mental note to buy his armorer a case of beer. Corporal Brooks appeared from down the ridge, running hard, his face pale. "Jesus Christ, Sergeant, I heard everything on the radio. Command is going insane. Captain Stone is threatening to." Brooks stopped, seeing Lance's expression. "You okay?" "Fine." "You don't look fine." Lance sat up slowly, every muscle protesting. "How many? How many what? How many did I hit?" Brooks glanced at Lance's empty magazines, did quick math. 50 shots. I watched through binos for part of it. I counted at least 40 confirmed kills, maybe another 8 wounded. From 3,000 meters. In mountain winds, 40. The number seemed abstract, meaningless. "The SEALs?" Lance asked. "All accounted for. 3 Kia, 8 wounded, but the rest are okay. They're asking for you." Lance stood, gathered his equipment. His legs wobbled slightly. "Sergeant, you know you're probably going to face discipline for this, right? Unauthorized engagement, disobeying a direct order." "I know." "Was it worth it?" Lance looked at the valley where 21 SEALs had been pinned down, certain of death, and thought about David. About promises made at funerals. About the difference between regulations and doing what's right. "Yeah," he said. "It was worth it." Lance was wrong about the count. As he packed his rifle, movement caught his eye. Through his scope, he saw one last enemy fighter hiding behind a boulder at the battlefield's edge. The man had an RPG launcher across his knees, waiting for the helicopters to pass. 1 shot left in Lance's chamber. He'd kept it there out of habit, the one in the pipe rule of never fully clearing a weapon in a combat zone. The fighter rose, lifting the RPG toward the medical evacuation helicopter that was approaching to collect the wounded SEALs. Lance didn't think. Didn't calculate wind or distance or barrel heat. Just moved on pure instinct, muscle memory, and 15 years of training. He dropped back into position, acquired the target, and fired. The bullet crossed 3,200 meters in 4.2 seconds. It struck the RPG warhead at the exact moment the fighter's finger tightened on the trigger. The resulting explosion was massive. The shaped charge detonated, triggering a secondary explosion in the fighter's ammunition vest. The blast was powerful enough to cause a small landslide, burying 3 other hidden enemy fighters who'd been preparing an ambush. The medical helicopter altered course slightly but continued its approach, the crew never knowing how close they'd come to dying. Lance worked the bolt one final time. The empty casing ejected, spinning in the sunlight before landing in the mud. 51, he said quietly. Brooks stared through his binoculars at the smoking crater. "Did you just—" "We need to move," Lance interrupted. "Captain Stone is probably sending MPs already." But Lance didn't move immediately. He sat there for another moment, looking at his rifle. 51 rounds fired. 42 confirmed kills. 8 more wounded, badly enough to take them out of the fight. At a range that military doctrine said was impossible. and one final shot that had saved another dozen lives. The statistical improbability of what he'd just done made his head hurt. Every shot had required perfect calculation, perfect timing, perfect execution. And he'd strung together 51 of them in succession. It shouldn't have been possible, but it had happened anyway. The debriefing room at Forward Operating Base Hammer was small, windowless, and smelled like stale coffee. Lance sat across a metal table from Captain Wesley Stone, a JAG officer, and Colonel Patricia Hayes, the base commander. Stone had been talking for 10 minutes, detailing Lance's violations of protocol, his disregard for the chain of command, the potential consequences. Lance let the words wash over him without really listening. Colonel Hayes finally interrupted. "Captain Stone, I've heard enough. Let me speak with Sergeant Barrett directly." Stone's jaw tightened, but he nodded and fell silent. Hayes studied Lance for a long moment. She was in her late 40s, combat ribbons covering her left chest, including a silver star from Iraq. "Do you understand the severity of what you did?" she asked. "Yes, ma'am." "You disregarded a direct order from your commanding officer." "Yes, ma'am." "You engaged targets at a range that exceeds all standard operating procedures." "Yes, ma'am." Hayes leaned forward. "Do you regret it?" Lance met her eyes directly. "No, ma'am. I'd do it again." Stone made a noise of frustration, but Hayes held up her hand, silencing him. "Commander Hawkins sends his regards," she said. "He's in surgery right now, took 3 rounds, but they expect full recovery. He wanted me to tell you that you saved his life and the lives of 20 of his men. He's recommending you for the Navy Cross." Lance blinked. "I'm not Navy, ma'am." "I'm aware. He's recommending it anyway. The SEAL community takes care of the people who take care of them." She paused. "I've also received calls from 2 generals and a senator. Everyone wants to know about the Marine sniper who made 51 consecutive impossible shots." 51? Lance had lost count somewhere in the middle. "We recovered the battlefield afterward. Forensics confirmed 51 impacts that match your rifle's ballistic signature. 42 fatalities, 9 wounded, from an average range of 3,000 meters in unfavorable conditions." Hayes pulled out a file, opened it. "Your record says you've been a scout sniper for 7 years. 43 confirmed kills before today. Exemplary service record. Never a single disciplinary action." "Until today," Stone interjected. Hayes ignored him, kept her focus on Lance. "The question I need answered, Sergeant Barrett, is this: can you follow orders?" "Yes, ma'am." "Then why didn't you?" Lance chose his words carefully. "Ma'am, I evaluated the tactical situation and determined that following that specific order would result in the deaths of 21 friendly personnel. I made a judgment call." "That's not your place to make judgment calls that contradict direct orders." "With respect, ma'am, that's exactly what we train non-commissioned officers to do. We give them authority to make decisions in the field because they have information that command doesn't. I had visual on the battlefield. Captain Stone didn't. I knew I could make those shots. He didn't." "You couldn't have known you'd make those shots," Stone protested. "The range alone—" "I've been shooting since I was 6 years old," Lance interrupted, looking at Stone directly. "I know my limitations. I knew I could do it." Stone started to respond, but Hayes cut him off again. "Here's what's going to happen," she said. "Officially, you'll receive a letter of reprimand for disregarding orders. It goes in your file. That makes Captain Stone and the JAG happy." Stone nodded, satisfied. "Unofficially," Hayes continued, "you'll also receive a commendation for extraordinary heroism under fire, because what you did today was either the luckiest shooting in military history or the most skilled. And I don't believe in that much luck." She closed the file. "You're dismissed, Sergeant Barrett. Don't make me regret being lenient." "Yes, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am." Lance stood, saluted, and left the room. Outside, Brooks was waiting in the hallway. "How'd it go?" "Letter of reprimand." "That's it?" "And a commendation." Brooks laughed. "Only you could get both at the same time." They walked out into the Afghan sun. The temperature was pushing 115 degrees, but after the stifling conference room, the heat felt almost pleasant. "The SEALs are asking for you," Brooks said. "They're gathering at the medical tent." Lance shook his head. "I'm not good with that kind of thing." "Tough. They waited through your whole debriefing. Come on." They walked across the base to the medical facility. Outside, a group of men in SEAL uniforms waited, some bandaged, some on crutches, all looking exhausted. When Lance approached, they fell silent. Then Commander Ethan Hawkins stepped forward. His left arm was in a sling, bandages covered his shoulder, but he was on his feet. "Sergeant Barrett," he said formally, "on behalf of SEAL Team Bravo, I want to thank you for your actions today. You saved 21 lives at great personal risk and with extraordinary skill." He extended his good hand. Lance shook it. "Just doing my job, sir." Hawkins smiled slightly. "Your job is convoy overwatch. What you did today was well beyond your job description." The other SEALs gathered around, each one shaking Lance's hand, some with tears in their eyes. These were hard men, trained to the pinnacle of military capability, and they were emotional. Petty Officer Derek Jensen clasped Lance's hand with both of his. "I saw my kids yesterday on video call. Now I'll get to see them in person. Because of you." Another SEAL, Riley, stepped up. "I counted at least a dozen times I should have died today. Every time, I heard your rifle, and the threat disappeared. You're the best shooter I've ever seen." The praise made Lance uncomfortable. He'd done what needed doing, nothing more. But looking at these men, wounded, exhausted, but alive, he understood what David had meant about showing up, about being present when it mattered. "Anyone would have done the same," Lance said. "No," Hawkins replied firmly. "No, they wouldn't have. You made shots today that shouldn't be possible. You disobeyed orders to save our lives. That's not anyone. That's courage and skill at the highest level." Lance didn't know what to say to that, so he just nodded. The group stood there in the sun for a few more minutes, talking quietly. Hawkins told Lance about the battle, from their perspective, the growing desperation, the certainty of death, and then the impossible sniper fire that kept them alive. "We didn't know where you were," Hawkins said. "We couldn't see you, couldn't communicate clearly. But every time we needed you, you were there, like a guardian angel with a rifle." "Ghostline," Riley said. "That's what they call you, right? Perfect name." Eventually, medical staff came to escort the wounded SEALs back to their beds. Hawkins was the last to go. "Barrett," he said, pausing at the door, "when this deployment's over, if you ever need anything, and I mean anything, you call me. You've got 21 brothers in the SEAL community now." "Thank you, sir." Hawkins disappeared into the medical facility, leaving Lance and Brooks alone again. "How do you feel?" Brooks asked. Lance thought about it. The exhaustion, the ache in his shoulder, the faces of the men he'd killed, even though they'd been trying to kill others. The weight of 51 trigger pulls. "Tired," he said finally. "Really tired. Want to get some rack time?" "Yeah, that sounds good." They walked toward the barracks in silence. Lance's rifle was already secured in the armory, his gear stowed. Tomorrow, he'd clean everything, document the engagement, fill out endless paperwork. But for now, he was just tired. As they walked, Brooks asked, "Do you think you'll ever make another shot like that?" Lance looked up at the mountains, thinking about angles and wind and distance, thinking about the difference between what's possible and what's necessary. "Hope I never have to," he said. And he meant it. Because 51 shots at 3,200 meters wasn't just marksmanship. It was desperation, skill, and luck balanced on the edge of a bullet's flight path. He'd done the impossible once. Doing it again might require more than he had left to give. But if 21 men needed him again, Lance Barrett knew he'd try anyway. Because that's what Guardians did. They showed up. They fought. They protected. Even when the odds said it couldn't be done. Especially then,